I cut up some walnut bowl blanks to make spindle blanks for turning some cute little wooden chickens. The one on the right, as you can see, has the grain orientation going the wrong way. After getting my bandsaw sized up just perfectly and taking the cut, I realized that I had messed up. Instead of having the grain running from left to right as it's supposed to be when you're spindle turning, I have it running from front to back. I almost threw the blank away thinking, well, that's one cute little chicken that's never going to get made. And then I really got thinking about how it's a little bit of a metaphor for my own life. I'm diagnosed with several things that collectively go by the term neurodivergence. I'm a little bit like that blank there where my grain doesn't run from left to right. It runs more from front to back. And the way that I interact with the things around me is a little bit different. So I thought, well, let me see if I can make my neurodivergent self-portrait in a chicken here. I started with my bowl gouge to true it up because I thought the spindle roughing gouge was going to be a really bad idea for trying to knock the corners off. Once I had it all trued up though, I decided to try very gingerly and carefully using the spindle roughing gouge. Ordinarily I would not present that to grain in this orientation, but if I took very light cuts with a very sharp tool, I managed to get away with it. I wasn't sure if I would, but I did. From there, I marked out with an existing template. I used my parting tool very carefully in scraping mode. I didn't want to try to do a peeling cut with it because that would have been a bad day when approaching end grain every rotation. From there, I marked out where the bottom of the chicken was, and I took extremely light and very careful cuts with my spindle gouge. I wouldn't normally use that on grain of this orientation, and I knew I was risking something here, but I got away with it. Careful cuts, very slowly, and the best technique that I could possibly use made all the difference in the world. And I think that was also kind of a metaphor for my neurodivergent self. I don't necessarily understand things the way that everybody else does with subtext and that type of thing. I'm very literal, so things have to be very precise, and so I had to be very precise with my spindle gouge when I was doing that. From there, I used my skew chisel as a scraper. I got it nice and sharp with 600 grit CBN slipstone, and then sanding it up through the grits. I'm sure there's things that are more boring than sanding. I'm just not really sure what they are. Sanding's probably the most boring part of any wood turning project. My son, who's also neurodivergent, actually rather likes sanding. It's his favorite part of the project, so I guess he has his grain in a different orientation as well. I marked out where I wanted the eyes to go, and then I used my dividers to make the two indentations for where I was going to drill the eye holes. And then I used the same divider setting to make the location of the beak hole so that I had a perfect equilateral triangle. And then I did a little bit more sanding and applied some Hut pen wax. I find it works really well on spindle projects. Because the grain orientation is a little bit different, you get chatoyancy that you wouldn't ordinarily get from walnut in spindle orientation, so it makes it kind of interesting. Now, one thing you'll notice is that there's a few cracks in the wood there. That's because the bowl blank was kind of old. Another turner had it in his collection before I inherited it. When I was parting him off, because the grain runs opposite the way I would normally expect it to, it came off the lathe a lot sooner than I expected it to, and it took a skid across my lathe and across my workshop, so he got some marks on him. I decided to keep him that way anyhow, and there he is together with his normal grain orientation brethren. You can tell that he stands out a little bit. I painted up the combs on top. I've got eyes in one of them to see how it looks, and there he is. From there I made some beaks. I gave it an extra coat of yellow paint after this video clip was taken, and then I applied it to the chickens. So here are the normal grain orientation chickens, and here is my neurodivergent self-portrait right here. But he needs a little something more. Before we get to the something more, we'll just take a look at his war wound one more time. Life tends to bump us neurodivergents around a little bit, so we get a little worse for wear. And here's the final finished guy right here, complete with a pair of copper wire glasses. He definitely stands out in a crowd. I hope my wife likes him. He's a Valentine's Day gift for her.